Hi everybody, welcome to the second birthday of the Stellium Astrology Podcast. It is today, the 29th of July, that I originally launched this podcast back in 2020, and so much has happened. I launched the podcast during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, but you know, it'd been an idea of mine for a long time. As regular listeners will be aware, I used to podcast a long time ago, and you know, it's something that I don't know, I just kind of feel comfortable sitting down and talking to a microphone or recording equipment. Regular listeners will also be aware that lately I've been doing my podcast on the go, because I've had a lot happen, and I haven't been able to use my studio properly, but things like that are going to be changing. So if you've just tuned in for the first time, I'm Stephanie James. I'm your host. I'm the founder of StelliumAstrology.com and this podcast. I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine. I teach classes for the London School of Astrology. I'm a published writer. I've probably missed some bits and bobs out there. Who knows? I don't know. But yes, this is a special episode of the Stellium Astrology Podcast because it is the second birthday. I can't believe that I would be celebrating in July 2 big birthdays. Well, 3 actually. My sister's, who's my wonderful crabby Cancerian bestie from the moment she was born. But I also am celebrating this podcast, 2 years old, and also slightly earlier in the month, my son's first birthday. Now, when I launched this podcast, I don't think it had really crossed my mind that it would be possible that I'd be having a baby so soon after launching a podcast. But hey, that's what happened. It was funny because I remember at the time electing the chart for the launch of the podcast. And no matter what I did, it was a tough chart to elect because it was one of those things where, you know, it was just a bad aspects. You know, I say bad aspects, you know, the planetary weather was looking a little more challenging, I should say. I don't want to say bad aspects because there's no such thing as there's challenging aspects which force growth, and you know, development and evolution, which is not a bad thing, you know, but it doesn't always mean that we're going to enjoy them, and that's the point. But yeah, that year 2020, anybody will remember if they cast their mind back. I know they kind of all blurred into one, but yeah, it was a challenging time, and I think, have I actually got the chart here of the podcast launch? I do. So yeah, the ascendant of the podcast is Virgo. The moon is Sagittarius. Now, it's 20 Virgo, the ascendant. The moon's at 0 Sagittarius. Midheaven 17 Gemini. Sun at 6 Leo. So, yeah, and, you know, the point of electing a chart is sometimes to avoid, rather than getting the best, like, you know, picking the most perfect day to do something. Sometimes it's about avoiding the days that aren't so good. And I find a lot when people come to me and say, can you elect something for me? I do often think, oh, this isn't the best, but if these are the only dates I can work with, then let's find the best time to do it. And I've found that a lot recently, even down to my son's first birthday party. Yes, I'm one of those people that threw a party for my little boy because it was the easiest option to get everybody together. Long story, but yeah, sometimes when you've got family members from all over the place, rather than doing repeated celebrations, it's easier to just get everybody into the same place and just do it all together. Now, there were some rather unfavourable aspects occurring then. But I decided, I'd looked at a number of dates and I thought, well, if I have to have this date, the thing is the date and the time were completely dictated to me as well, because I had an entertainer and the only time she could do was like afternoon. So there was really nothing I could do about it. But I had looked and thought, this isn't the best day, but it was, you know, as far as dates go, it could have been worse. And actually, it was an amazing day. It was really good. It was really fun. So, you know, even with a chart that doesn't look wonderful, you can still get great results. And, you know, there was a lot of stress surrounding the party, but I'd made a conscious decision to enjoy myself and to not let the stress consume me. So I left my stress at the door and I just had a fab time. The podcast, what I think is interesting, and I'll point out to you guys, is that we have a mutable ascendant for the elected launch date, which was the launch date, a mutable moon, and the sun is in a fixed sign. And interestingly, what we have is a podcast that's had to adapt to great change, including me having a baby and going on maternity leave for a number of months. So you've got that kind of committed consistency that you get with, a fixed sign like the sun in a fixed sign like Leo, but then the adaptability of a mutable ascendant and moon. So I've managed to keep this podcast going for 2 years, even though we've had all sorts of obstacles. There have been occasional glitches where I've not published it properly and it's not gone out exactly at the right time on the right day. But, 9 times out of 10, or I should say 99 times out of 100, I've been there. The only time I didn't have an episode for you guys was when I had COVID, and I could have put an episode out, but I decided to give myself a break. So I thought it'd be really interesting to look at that. And I'm not going to go into great, huge analysis at the moment. And just so you're aware, I do have my phone on. I am receiving calls, so I may have to leave this and record the rest of it at a later date, depending on what happens, because my son's just having his second settling in session at nursery. So I'm on call at the moment. So what I thought I would do is have a quick look. Firstly, I wanted to say thanks to some people. So I'll go through what I wanted to do, and then I'll have a little look at the charts that I wanted to explore. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to all of my listeners, every single one of you who has, been there and, sent me a message, left me a review, however you've got in touch with me. It really, really, honestly, I can't emphasize how much it actually just keeps me going on the days where I just think, I just don't know if I've got the energy to do this. It just keeps me going. So I also wanted to say a great big thank you to all of my patrons. That's the past and the present patrons. So I wanted to say thank you to Beatrice, to Lou, to Lacey, to Julie, to Carolina, to Gav, to Tanya, to Heidi, to Christiana, to Holly, to Cara, and to Maria. And Cara and Maria, you are my originals who've been with me since the very beginning. And what's lovely is that, with my patrons, some of them just like to support me and they're sort of there. Others are very active on Patreon, and they contact me and write me messages and stay in touch and keep on top of all the things I post on there. So I just want to say thank you to every single one of you who's been so generous, and has supported me on this journey. The people who aren't my patrons anymore, but I still want to say thank you to you, River, Isabel, Erica, and Heather. I just want to say a big thank you to you guys as well. And I'm really sorry if you've signed up and I didn't shout your name out. This is just recorded in advance, and sometimes these things don't synchronize as I'd hope. So I just want to say thank you to my patrons and just share great appreciation for you guys. I also wanted to say thank you so much to Sasha, who's been in touch with me on Instagram. Sasha sent me some tarot cards to say thank you for the all of the podcast episodes, and she's done a lot of learning on the podcast, and she just wanted to share her gratitude with me that way. And I wouldn't normally accept gifts from people in that way. I kind of feel like it's, I don't need you to send me things, but when she said I could send you some tarot cards, I thought, yes, I'd love a new deck. I'm a sucker for a deck. And she sent me a link to her dad's page, because her dad designs tarot cards. So I don't know if I'm saying it right or not. Is it Cairo Marchetti, or is it Ciro Marchetti? I'm not sure, but it's CIROMARCHETTI.art. That's her dad's page, and she said you can pick any tarot cards you like from those and we'll get them sent to you. And I was like, wow, that is so lovely, so sweet, thank you so much. So I decided to pick the Retrospective Tarot, which is a beautiful deck, and I want to make a video using those tarot cards, and I will make a video using those tarot cards at some point, and maybe a little unboxing video. So that was my thank yous, and I'm sure I've got more to say, but let's have a little look at the solar return charts. So I just want to I was just looking at the first solar return. So a solar return, if you're not aware, is a chart, a birthday chart. But instead of it being on the date, so instead of it being like the 29th of July, which is obviously when I launched the podcast, the solar return occurs when the sun is at the exact same degree and minute of the chart that it was when, you know, the event was born, when the podcast was born, when you were born. You know, when people say many happy returns, what they're saying is many happy solar returns. So, you know, I love the language, the way that it creeps in these little celestial hidden messages that we receive on special days like birthdays. So yeah, I just very quickly wanted to look at the first solar return chart. So the first solar return occurred on the 29th of July 2021, which was a Thursday, at 15:31 minutes and 58 seconds British summer time, which means it's universal time minus an hour. And that is in Northampton, England, which is where the podcast was launched and where I was living at the time of the first solar return, because if you move house, then the solar return is calculated for your current location, not the location where you were born or where the, you know, where it was born, whatever, you know, the business or whatever. So for the first birthday of the podcast, it depends what house system you want to use. I'm just using equal for this. I just decided to use equal. So the sun is at the same degree, obviously, because it's the solar return, and that's based on the positioning of the sun. So the sun's at 6:41 Leo, like it will always be every year on its birthday, in conjunction with Mercury. Mercury at 3 degrees Leo, sun at 6 degrees Leo. Mercury and the sun are never usually that far apart. You know, I think is my brain going to work? Is my brain going to work today? I think that the Mercury is, trying to think how far away it gets. Oh, I'm not going to guess now. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it really doesn't get too far. That's why we get so many retrograde periods, because they play a dance of, you know, Mercury dancing in front or behind of the sun, but never too far, and they're always connected. So we had Sun and Mercury in conjunction in Leo, and that was opposite Saturn at 10 Aquarius. I also had, the moon in Aries, and that was at in the 5th house. Now, moon and sun in fire signs is, you know, quite cooperative. Now, obviously the moon being in the 5th house, as you guys all know, not long after the podcasts, so I think not long after the launch of the podcast, I found out I was pregnant. So the podcast launched in July 2020, and I found out I was pregnant in, I think in November. I found out in November time, late October, November. I think it was eclipse season. And so I knew that this coming year of the podcast, I didn't know when my baby was going to be born, but I knew that I was going to have to, if I wanted to keep this podcast going, which I was serious about it, I was going to have to do a lot of pre-recorded episodes so that it would cover my time, my 4th trimester at least. So that's what I did. I recorded about 4 months worth of podcast episodes, which took me to about the end of my 4th trimester. And then from that point onwards, I was sort of like coming up with episodes, and it was very off the cuff and quite moving with, just going with the flow, seeing how the mood took me, how I wanted to do this. And there was a lot of plans I had for the podcast, which I wasn't able to put into motion because, there was just no way I could do it all, not while looking after a baby. And I was nursing the baby as well. So, it wasn't just like I could just ask somebody to feed him, because it was all solely down to me. So it was a big responsibility that I took on. And then to keep the podcast going, I knew I had to just adapt, which is interesting that the podcast does have that mutable ascendant and moon. It does indicate the ability to go with the flow, which is, I'm pleased about that. The having moon in the 5th house, obviously, conversation and everything was dictated by my availability around looking after my little boy. And like I said, I was a nursing mother, and this was a project which was an independent passion project. I'm kind of doing this by myself. I'm not doing this with other people. This is my baby before my baby. And the fact that the sun is in Leo, and always is interesting, because this is about passion, but actually interesting at a time in my life where I'm relearning the world through the eyes of a child. I'm really starting to understand the essence of what Leo is really about, plus the 5th house feel. Now, the sun being in the 9th house at the launch of on the first birthday is interesting, because I really did think about the future of the podcast, my own personal future, where things are going, kind of adapting new philosophies, understanding the world in a very different way. Really, like, my beliefs, when I say they were challenged, I guess they were. Like, there's just a lot that you learn when you become a parent, that, the world really does change, but it changes in a way that, I don't know, I think I've mentioned this before on a few episodes. I went through this thing called matrescence, which is like, they say you go through some hormonal changes which are very similar to when you go through your adolescent phase, where you go through puberty, that hormonal period where you are literally most people are going through hell. And when you become a mum, you go through really similar hormonal changes, and your priorities completely shift and your values completely shift. And it's an interesting time, because, I thought I was depressed, but I wasn't depressed. I was just going through a lot of hormonal shifts. It just basically, ultimately, it's part of a development and a growth into becoming, into that kind of going from the maiden to the mother as far as lunar phases is concerned. So it was really interesting to me that was happening. And then to see that the sun and Mercury were in the 9th house, it was like this kind of evolution of thought, where I had to go beyond my current thoughts, ideas, limitations, and just whole perspective, basically. And Mercury is important to me because it is my chart ruler. I have a Gemini ascendant. So that, interesting enough. And actually, for those of you who know my chart, Mercury at 3 Leo means it's opposing my natal Mercury and Venus conjunction, which I have in Aquarius. So again, interesting. And also square my Saturn and Pluto, which I have. So Pluto's at 29 Libra and Saturn's at 3 of Scorpio. So that's interesting. And then for it to be opposing Saturn as well, it's like that. It describes that responsibility that I've got. And in the 3rd house as well, the past year has been a lot about me making connections with my local community and building a support network for myself and my little boy. But at the same time, the communication, I was serious about, what I was trying to do. And though I wasn't able to be as organised and implement all the plans I had, I was serious about keeping this consistent, which I did. Other things that I just thought were really interesting was the fact that the ascendant is at 21 Scorpio, kind of describes the sense of being in the midst of a transformation. That whole year was very transformative for me. It's also, my Mars is at 23 Aquarius, where Saturn is right now. So when, the ascendant is 21, sort of around sort of 21 Scorpio, that means that my Mars is square the ascendant. And actually, I think I felt that, I wasn't able to do what I needed to do and take the action I wanted to take because there were limitations, there were challenges, and things that sort of held me back from, going full speed ahead, which I probably would have done had I not become a mum. Plenty more to comment here. There's loads to comment on, but I'm not going to go into it because it just seems a little unnecessary for me to go into so much depth. So let's have a quick look. Let's pull up the second solar return. If you're using Astro Gold, what you do is you select the chart you want to look at. So I'm looking at the launch date of the Stellium Astrology Podcast, going into subsidiary chart, and then going to solar return and selecting second year and viewing that to calculate it. And you can use your natal location, or you can use the relocated location. So for the second birthday, which is today, the moon is in Leo at 18 degrees, very close to Mercury. So we've gone from a Sun-Mercury conjunction to a Moon-Mercury conjunction. Interestingly, Mercury's at 20. And then the Sun is at 6 Leo. The Sun's gone from the 9th house to the 6th house. The Moon has gone from the 5th house to the 7th house. The Moon and Mercury are now opposite Saturn, as opposed to the Sun and Mercury being opposite Saturn in the original chart. So there still seems to be some sense of limitation and responsibility. Definitely now we can see that, as my little boy's starting up nursery soon, I am going to be dealing with other authority figures, and also, gaining a sense of routine and, getting quite serious again, but with a whole new agenda and a whole new perspective. Remember that whole 9th house outlook, being, it's a shift, wherever the Sun is in the chart is what's going to be changing for you that year, so that you gain an understanding and development in that area of life. So for me, that 9th house was all about suddenly the future was taking a different shape. Now, with the moon highlighting the 7th, relationships are going to take on an important role. Now, because this is the podcast and it's not my personal chart, we have to bear in mind that actually the moon in the 7th house is a caretaker moon, and it wants to look after other people. And the 7th house in my chart, in this podcast's chart, I believe will represent the listeners. So actually, the Moon-Mercury conjunction in Leo is about the people who I am, I might not be necessarily caretaking you all, but I am definitely doing what I can to broaden your intellect. Sounds a bit arrogant of me to say that, but to help you to understand yourselves and to maybe key into the language of astrology on a personal level. And actually, what's interesting, it leads me to share some ideas for what's coming up for the podcast this year. I'm going to start going back to some of more of the original format, where I get to talk about some of the shows you guys have suggested, some of the ideas you've sent in for having your charts looked at and questions you've wanted answered. So I'm going to be definitely putting you guys more in the, the spotlight, the limelight, but definitely drawing a lot from your input, which was the original idea for the podcast. But as you know, I had to be very adaptable last year. So this kind of tells me that actually I may be able to get back to my original plan and focus more on you guys. Saturn in the first house is a good time for getting serious. And actually in the book that I've read about solar returns, which is, I have it here, by Mary Fortier Shea, who has a Master of Arts in Counselling Psychology. And her book is called Planets in Solar Returns, Yearly Cycles of Transformation and Growth. It's a great book, actually. Really, really good. But yes, she talks about, in her book, Saturn being, she said, think about self-imposed responsibility like nursing a child, for example. which I thought was interesting that that was an example used, and I appreciated that example actually, because I really do understand the self-imposed responsibility aspect of that. I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to. And, it's interesting that, that I am still nursing my son. And, that is something that I plan to continue to do. So I am still going to have limitations and restrictions around what's possible for me. But it's very different to how it was before. But the sun and the moon are very close together. There are a few degrees. So the sun's at 6 and the moon is at 18 Leo. The ascendant is at 12 Aquarius. So that is interesting in itself because my midheaven is 12 Aquarius. So my midheaven happens to be rising in the chart of the second year, which for me indicates that I'm going to be focusing a lot on, my career aspirations. That's going to be something that's going to be in my mind on the forefront throughout this next year. And it has been. So far, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do, where I want to go, how I want to develop myself, now that I am going to be going back to a sense of normality and stepping out of the mummy bubble a bit. But what is more interesting to me about this is the fact that means that 12 degrees Leo is setting and the midpoint of the sun and the moon is 12 Leo. So whenever you have a midpoint between a sun and a moon, it's a great relationship point. It shows where sometimes in a chart, something might happen. The sun might be highlighting what seems to be a seemingly unimportant point, something that doesn't really hold any relevance to your chart. There may be no planet there. It just seems like, well, why is this happening today? I don't understand. But if you look at midpoints in your chart, and I know with some software you can actually calculate midpoints, you can also use, I think you can calculate midpoints on Astro Gold, which is what I'm using on my phone right now. But planetary midpoints are very interesting to look at, particularly midpoints like the sun and the moon, because it gives you, it's a relationship point. It's definitely, natally, what's even more interesting is that I actually have sun at 17, sort of between 17 and 18 Capricorn, moon at 16 Scorpio, and the midpoint of my sun and moon is actually my descendant. So this echoes something natally for me. And relationships are important to me. In the context of this podcast, relationships with my listeners, my clients, is going to take on a leading kind of role, I think, this year. I think it's going to develop in a positive way. And because this is a new moon and it's actually just opening up from a new moon phase, so it's still in the new moon phase at the moment, it's actually growing out of that new moon and moving forward and growing and developing into, having more light shed on the moon, basically. It's actually growing in light, but it's still in that very new reborn phase. So it's not a closing new moon, it's an opening new moon. It's a new one, a new moon. So it's interesting. It's like beginning of a phase that has started and is going to unfold. It's a nice, interesting looking one. Also nice for me because it is in Leo, trine my Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Sag. It's also opposing my Mercury. It's doing what it was doing, what Mercury was doing last year, which is highlighting my, my planets in fixed signs. So it's definitely still providing me with that challenge, but it is, it's definitely, it's highlighting for me the sun is in the 6th house. So what it says in that book is that I need to take my health more seriously. Whenever the sun's in the 6th house, when it comes to solar returns, health is indicated, routine and monotony is highlighted, And what I think, let's have a quick look. I've actually just had it to hand. She says something, I thought it was quite an interesting way to word it. Something about streamlining. Oh, so she said, the emphasis of sixth house is more on the daily details of work than the overall career. Now, as I've said, my midheaven happens to be rising in this chart. So that career will be a large player, I think, a key player for me. But it's not the year to shine in my career. It's the year for me to really understand what, with my midheaven being on the ascendant, I have to really tune in to what I really want so that I can go forward and develop that. So, yeah, anyway, so she says, consequently, you're more job-orientated than career-orientated with this placement. The difference is very subtle. You're aware of major career issues when the sun is in the 10th house, and you are more apt to work for promotion, recognition and career change during this time. Important decisions regarding profession are possible while career fulfillment is likely. But when the sun is in the 6th house, your profession will tend to be stable and the emphasis will be on immediate job issues and working situations. This is an excellent time to reevaluate your work routines and make adjustments towards greater efficiency. Even if you love work routines, even if you love your job, you will find parts of your day tedious and boring. Streamline your operation and make changes where appropriate. I would say that seems very appropriate for this podcast. It is time to streamline. It has been going for a while. We have a solid groundwork now. I know kind of where I want to go with it. But I'm still open to ideas if anyone's got any. But yeah, it's all about streamlining what we do here and, making sure that I have a clear and structured routine that will enable me to be productive and get the work done and, not compromise on my work-life balance, which is the thing I think that's the biggest struggle. Because when we don't have a good work-life balance, then we can get burnt out, our health can suffer. So that's maybe not the most articulate way of me broaching this subject. But anyway, that was just a few. I just didn't want to go into too much detail, and I feel like I really did. I have been talking now already for about half an hour, but I just wanted to look at the solar returns. There's so much more to look at. Just one more thing I'll touch on is that the midheaven of the second birthday is at 9 Sag. My Uranus is at 8 Sag, or is it 7? I think it's 8. So, for me, I know already looking, great change is coming this year. And I know that great change is coming this year. There's a lot of stuff going on for me that I'm not sharing just yet. But yeah, there's a lot of changes on the horizon. And, I'm just ready to roll with it, basically. I'm going to roll with it. The sun is actually trine the midheaven of the chart. It's also trine Jupiter in the second birthday chart, which means that these changes, I'm going to go with the flow. I think that they're positive for the future of the podcast and for myself. And, it's something that, fortunately, as an astrologer, I can tap into these. I can tap into some of the planetary weather and plan for the less favourable outcomes, plan for the less favourable weather, wear my raincoat if it's going to rain, if you know what I mean. So, an interesting view into looking at what the future for the podcast will be this year and taking into consideration the location of the sun in order to understand how best I can help myself grow and the podcast too. So, back to just talking, just a bit of waffle now. So, I am having a reinventing the Patreon page. I'm probably going to change the tiers down a bit, change the prices on the tiers. I'm not going to offer quite what I offered before. I am going to change my offerings and I'm going to start putting some of the content that I would have put out on Patreon on YouTube. So if you're interested in what I've been doing on Patreon, keep your eyes peeled on the YouTube channel and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell. and email me if you've subscribed and screenshot that so that, I can put you into a draw for a Magic of Eye Astrological Almanac, which I will send out to one lucky winner towards the end of this year. And, all you have to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel to be in for a chance of winning that diary. And if you're an existing subscriber, you're already in the draw. However, I just wanted to let you know that some people's YouTube channels are private, which means that if you have subscribed and you wanted to win a diary, I'm not going to be able to contact you to let you know that you've won a diary if you haven't made your YouTube channel public. That's why I say screenshot it and email me, just in case. So the email address is Stephanie, Stefanie, @stelliumastrology.com. So the other thing, to celebrate the second birthday, I am going to be launching some new services, which involve tarot and a little bit of astrology. Yes, I'm branching out. And these services are going to be slightly different because they require less, if not any, preparation, which means I have more time to, I don't have to, factor in hours of research prior to. I can literally sit down, pull the cards, look at the current weather and do it all very much in the moment, which is kind of like living the dream for me, the idea of doing something like that. So, I will be publishing my new services soon, so keep your eyes peeled. They may not be out just yet, but yeah, I'm going to have a link at the bottom of this podcast for anybody who wants to have a look at all of my most recommended routes to explore. The booking calendar should be published up there, if not immediately, then soon, with my new services. But there's also links to my website and to the YouTube channel and to other avenues that may be of interest to you. Yes, so anything else I need to say to you? Make sure if you want to know about when readings are available that you've joined the mailing list. There's a link to that in my below as well, just because from now on I think I'm going to be communicating most of my information through the mailing list. I'm going to get to grips with MailChimp. It's got to happen. It's just been such a long time. I've got a mailing list, but I hardly ever send out any newsletters, so I am going to start getting back into that. And yes, so anybody who's on the mailing list will hear about anything new coming out prior to anybody else, other than the patrons. That's patrons, and the subscribers are going to get first dibs on all the juicy gossip. So that's it for now, guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support. This has been the second birthday episode. It's been interesting exploring solar returns and having a look at what happened last year and what could potentially happen this year. It's great to look at solar returns in hindsight. I think Cara was asking me about solar returns, and I can do an episode on solar returns. And Cara, maybe that might be our first area of exploration when we start looking into, when I start recording new episodes, and potentially could be back in my studio again and could even do some enhanced podcasts, which is part of what I've wanted to do for ages for this podcast. It's just been such a long time coming, and when my little boy's in nursery, for half a day I will be able to focus on my astrology work, which would be such a treat for me. Okay, guys, you take care. Thank you so much, and I will be back next week with perhaps a new agenda. I might carry on with a couple of Synastry episodes just because I've got a couple of interesting people, but very soon we will be going into the new format of the podcast, which is kind of just re-embodying the old format, but maybe in a slightly different way. All right, you guys take care. Thanks a lot. Bye now.